I do hope you can see me today from where you are.
Ich bin ein Dealie.
If I'm generally anything, I guess I'm generally miserable. This modern world of science and invention is of particular interest to women.
The people, I would say, there is no patent. Would you patent the sun?
I regard myself as a soldier, though a soldier of peace.
Welcome to the Biographers.
I don't really get it. ASMR. Okay.
You know what ASMR is, right?
Yeah, I do. But I just don't I don't get it. Like, I get it, but some things are satisfying, and I get that. Like, the chalk things, like the gymnastics chalk. Have you seen
gymnastics chalk?
You know, did you ever do gymnastics at all?
I mean, and like rock climbing or whatever, the chalk that they use for your hands? Yeah.
So that chalk is like a big ASMR thing. People like crunch it and crumple it, and they put like dye in it, and they do all kinds of weird things.
And they do this for sound.
Yeah, sound. Yeah.
Okay, I mean,
yeah.
Whatever your bag is, I'm fine with it. I don't understand ASMR myself.
I was following an ASMR Instagram page for a while, and then it got weird. Like, there were too many sticky things, and I had to just move on.
Sticky? That doesn't sound fun.
I don't like sticky things. Okay.
Then you don't like the Sticky Bandits, which I don't believe.
Who are the Sticky Bandits?
Oh, come on. Home Alone?
Oh, yeah.
Good
no.
Lord.
Yes. Okay. No, some of that stuff freaks me out. The tar.
There's tar ASMR?
No, the tar in the Sticky Bandits, when he's got the tar.
Oh, on his hands, and he puts it in the bucket to get the change?
Yes, but like, isn't there something also where it's like he steps on it?
Where it's the stairs, you're saying, where he puts like the nail and stuff on the stairs. Okay.
The tarring and feathering also. Anyway, okay, cool.
All right, well, Aubrey, are you ready?
I'm ready. Are we recording?
We've been recording for a little while now. That's exactly what I was going for. It was just, hey, we're gonna just fall into this as we will. So, I guess I should probably say to all of our listeners, potentially at least, welcome to the Biographers Podcast. This is our first episode. I don't really know how to do an introduction, as I've never done one for anything like this before. So I'm just kind of filling some space before I go into talking about the thing that I actually have to talk about today.
I think that's great, because silence makes people uncomfortable. So just keep talking. Just talk.
I mean, some silence is good, but not always. So I guess explaining some intent here, the Biographers. This is something I've wanted to do, as you know, for a very long time, and I've talked about wanting to do for a very long time, and really it just came down to, hey, look, maybe there is somebody out there that's doing something like this, but not that I've really been able to find, and that is to say, deep dive biographies. I really just wanted to have something that was long format, where I could have somebody explain to me, rather than me reading a book, exactly what this person was that I'm interested in, or who they were and what their life story was, right? And unfortunately, because I couldn't find it, I ended up having to do all of the reading myself. So here we are.
Reading is the worst.
I mean, this is true. I actually, in the past week and a half, went through 3 doctor's visits to get fully and officially diagnosed with ADHD, and it came back. They're like, yep, you definitely have it.
Congratulations.
And so, yay, thank you. But that makes it reading especially hard. And so I will have everybody know I did all of this without any medication.
I am very impressed.
Thank
and
you.
having known you for many, many years, and seeing you get so excited about something that you've been telling us for years that you're excited about anyway.
Exactly.
It is a feat when you've got a touch of the attention deficit to like focus on something so that you can create something like a podcast.
You know, it honestly, it's definitely been a gear change in my brain of having to go like, nope, go make time to go do this. But it's been really, really fun, and I've gotten really into it.
Create more content than we consume.
Exactly.
Except people listening consume this content. Also create if you want to, but
hey,
do
make
consume.
a podcast. If you love this, get out there. You do it yourself. Look at me. I'm doing it right. We are.
Yeah.
Come on. Let's do it. All right. So, that was loud. I know that was going to peak on the microphones. And this is something that everybody out there, you're going to have to get used to as well, because we're not audio engineers. So we're going to have to figure out this whole recording process as we go. But I think it sounded pretty good.
Fly in the plane while we're building it.
Exactly. So, Aubrey, let me tell you about the life of Mabel Dodge Luhan. So, Mabel Ganson Evans Dodge Stern Luhan, or Mabel Dodge Luhan, as she would later come to call herself, was a wealthy socialite, author, and patron of the arts from the early 20th century. She was a widow from one of her 4 marriages, and divorced 2 of her husbands in a time when divorce was beyond taboo. She was ahead of her time in many ways, relatively open with her bisexual or possibly even lesbian nature, going so far as to write full sections of her memoirs devoted to her sexual encounters with women.
Okay.
She was a horse trainer for a time in her youth and assisted in breaking stallions. Although she didn't originally
There's a joke there about ladies and stallion. I don't know.
Uh-oh. No, just say it.
I don't know.
A woman breaking a stallion?
I mean, she's breaking a stallion, and then she turns out that she's maybe into the ladies later, and it's like maybe it was just like, you know, the start of that summit to.
Well, I will tell you about her time breaking stallion. It was very brief, but she did do it, and I won't spoil as to why she was doing it, but I'll tell you in a few minutes.
I'm on the edge of my seat, literally.
Because that microphone is far away.
No, it's good. I feel like I'm ingrained in the story already.
Oh, perfect. Now, although she didn't originally coin the term, she is the reason we know the phrase movers and shakers. She was a complicated and imperfect figure with different seasons in her life made all the more interesting by a robust catalog of memoirs and letters that she left behind. But, perhaps most famously, Mabel was known for her antics later on in life, where she moved to the deserts of New Mexico to a town called Taos, where she established an art community whilst simultaneously fulfilling her self-proclaimed calling to, quote, save the American Indian.
Okay.
Yeah.
Little not PC anymore, but we get the sentiment.
Yes, and I'll address that in just a second too.
Sorry, I'm jumping ahead. I'm supposed to make, I don't know, comment. I'll be quiet.
No, this is perfect. This is exactly what exactly what I wanted. Now, during her time in Taos, she attracted the likes of D.H. Lawrence, Ansel Adams, Aldous Huxley, Willa Cather, and Georgia O'Keeffe, amongst many other artists of varying disciplines. Now, before we get too far into her life, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge my primary source. The main book used was Mabel, a biography of Mabel Dodge Luhan by Emily Hahn. It's a great read, and Emily Hahn had, she passed away in 1997, a massive bibliography and extensive experience in research-based biographies. I also read through portions of some of Mabel's own memoirs, including Lorenzo in Taos, Winter in Taos, and Intimate Memories Volumes 1 through 4, respectively. I will put the caveat, I definitely did not read all of those books. There's definitely sections of them. There's a lot of reading to be done there that I cannot do.
Additional research.
Exactly. I'd also like to say that throughout this series, to address what you were just about to say, I will be using the term, quote, Indian as it is used in context with the overall reading, which is obviously to say Native American. I will do my absolute best to use the term Native American as often as I can, but I do apologize for the occasional time I do use it, and hopefully it's in context. But if anybody out there is a Native American listener, apologies, no offense intended. I'm also going to say really quickly, too, that there are a lot of names in this that are... I could probably do a whole thing just researching how to pronounce these names, and I'm promising you I'm going to butcher most of them, starting with Mabel Dodge Luhan. I would be willing to bet that if you asked somebody it's Luhan, I'm not going to say Luhan every single time. It rolls off the tongue. Luhan, much easier. So, again, if anybody out there is offended by that, my apologies. All right, so let's get into the life of Mabel Dodge Luhan. Mabel Ganson, as she was originally known, was born on February 26, 1879, in Buffalo, New York. What's that?
A Pisces.
You're going to have to help me on that, because I have no idea when it comes to star signs or zodiac.
I know that because my father is a Pisces, and it's after. Anyway, Pisces. Creative and benevolent is Pisces.
Creative and benevolent. I mean, that kind of fits with Mabel. We'll get into it. So she was born on February 26, 1879 in Buffalo, New York, to Charles Ganson and Sarah Cook Ganson, both of whom stemmed from wealthy banking families. Charles Ganson, or Charlie, as most people knew him, was born to a wealthy Ganson family who established the Ganson Bank in Buffalo. Charlie studied law, but never practiced, and was eventually placed into a, quote, by-title-only job at his father's bank. Most of his time was spent at an office that he rented downtown, but seemingly nobody really knew what he did down there, but was assumed to be pursuing his most passionate hobby, flags.
Like
flags.
Like making them or collecting them or
Everything.
twirling them?
So literally everything. So Charlie would pour through flag book after flag book, knew every flag you could show him. He had his own extensive collection of flags and would even fly specific flags on his house's flagpole for special events.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so
Okay.
for example, there was a time that he flew the British flag to celebrate a visit from Oscar Wilde to the town of Buffalo. He even designed his own personal flag for himself. This is one of my favorite things ever. Hilariously, he would only fly his personal flag when his wife, Sarah, would go out of town to visit her parents in New York, but then would lower the flag to half-mast when she would return.
Okay, I just want to say that is such a sign of respect for your spouse.
Respect, you say?
I don't know. Like, I'm not going to have my flag up when you're here because you're the top flag.
No. He puts his flag up when she's gone, and then
Right.
when she comes back, he puts it down to half-mast. You put your flag to half-mast when somebody dies.
Oh, yeah.
He is
okay.
equating it to her coming home,
As
and it's like
the death of his
is happening,
creativity
and
and
the
his-
death of his freedom or
Yep.
something. It's now to half-mast.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I don't know. I would want to be the top flag on but half mast, yeah.
How would you feel if you went away on a business trip and you knew that Aaron put up a flag and you came home and then you knew he would lower it to half-mast?
I just want it just slightly below, like the way that you fly the state flag below the American flag. That's what I want, not half mast. Also, is it mast or staff?
I thought it was half-mast, but maybe it is staff as well?
Well, a mast is on a
or is
boat.
it mast?
No, it's
Half-mast?
mast or staff. But do we have an intern doing research while we're talking?
Yeah, we should get an intern soon. And
Immediately.
we can snap at and just say, give me information on
Anyone in
something.
the northern Thornton area of Colorado, please. We are hiring a unpaid intern.
That just can be our lackey to Wikipedia things for us occasionally.
I don't
when
want to
we
be
need.
Googling while you're talking because then I'll be distracted and I'll
Exactly.
be obding. We don't want that.
Well, we'll get into that.
We'll
at
find out
another
later.
Time, obding. All right. Also, you can hear me coughing occasionally. I just have to clear my throat. I apologize.
Allergies.
All right. I know, it's always. So, Charlie kept to himself most times, wasn't much for conversation outside of his own personal interests, and was by all accounts a grumpy curmudgeon. Charlie and his wife Sarah had a strained relationship, to put it mildly, as he openly admitted to hating her.
Okay, well, okay, yeah, now I see. Also, my grandfather was Charlie. He was kind of a curmudgeon, too.
So are you saying that he hated his wife as well?
No, he actually loved my grandmother and was devoted to her until the very end, but he was a bit of a curmudgeon to most everyone else. But okay.
Strangely enough, he openly admitted to hating her, but he would occasionally show these really strange signs of extreme jealousy. Okay?
Ooh, interesting.
On one occasion, Charlie invited over a close friend that he had known since college named Fred for dinner. After dinner, Fred got to talking with Sarah, and after a while, Charlie got up, walked into the other room, slamming the other door behind him. He returned a few minutes later with a stamped letter in hand. He turned to Fred and said, "You'll receive a letter in the morning." He then proceeded to walk outside down to the corner of the street to deposit a letter into the mailbox. He then walked back into the house, sat down, and cordially finished out the evening. The next day, Fred received a letter from Charlie stating that he was not to come back to his house again. And as he said, quote, "You're having too much fun with Sarah."
That's the most mixed up combination of aggression and passive aggression in the same moment.
I honestly do. One of my favorite things about this entire story is that you get this amazing look into what it must have been like in Victorian times for couples. Okay. It's amazing. And this is one of the best examples of it. This relationship between Sarah and Charlie Ganson. It's like they seem to hate each other, but just seem to accept that this is their lives together and there's nothing they can do about it. It's really bizarre.
Huh. Committed to your fate.
Yeah. Pretty odd. Now, Sarah Cook Ganson was from the wealthy Cook line of bankers, and her grandfather even founded a little town in New York called Bath. Sarah was described as being vivacious, pleasure-loving, and exuberantly healthy. Like most wives in those days, especially wealthy aristocratic ones, Sarah spent her days as an exacting housekeeper, but seemed to take every opportunity she could to travel, visiting her parents in New York City or vacations to Europe, in particular, Paris. Pretty sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot is known about Sarah, as she's described as being an excessively stubborn and unchatty person. So much so that there's actually one account of Charlie becoming so angry with her silence that he beat her for it.
Ugh.
Yeah, which is... okay, whatever.
That's interesting, though, because she was also described as vivacious, which usually means, like, you know, lively and talkative. And so was he just stomping out all of her spirit with his curmudgeoniness?
It's interesting. So in the book, it actually describes a lot that Mabel seemed like she could not give her mother an inch. Basically, she saw her as bad, and that was the end of the story. Most of what we know about Mabel came from Mabel herself. She wrote a ton of autobiographies about all of her different experiences. And she seems to be the only one that feels this way about her mom. Everybody else throughout her life really enjoyed her company, thought she was really funny, thought she was, like it says here, vivacious, pleasure-loving, healthy, running around, doing all these different things. But Mabel just, nope.
Well, maybe she was miserable in her marriage and her home.
So as we're going to see,
shut down.
Yes, as we're going to see, Mabel hated not just her mom, but her dad too. There's a lot there. And I think there was just a very cold house the entire time.
Sounds fun. Let's learn more.
Sounds great, right? So, needless to say, not a great relationship. But Sarah never divorced. Divorce again for this time was simply not done. Okay. To give an example of just how uncommon divorcing was, there was an occasion where one of Sarah's friends was served divorce papers from her husband. She didn't know what to do, so the woman dressed all in black and proceeded to be driven in a closed carriage up and down her block, going door to door to announce her divorce to the neighbors and show them the papers. Okay. So for Sarah Ganson, there was no getting out of the marriage. Right? Imagine that scene, by the way. Imagine like a little at your door and then, hello? And a woman all in black just sobbing and then just hands you papers and goes, he's divorcing me.
It's a bit different these days.
I don't know how
people
I would
have
react to
divorce parties and whatnot.
that. I know.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Pretty wild. So to this unstable, unloving, and strict relationship add the strange and artistic Mabel Ganson. Mabel's early life was seemingly common for the ultra-wealthy at the time, both emotionally and physically, and her memoirs talked about the feelings of emptiness and lack of warmth inside the Ganson mansion. She was raised mostly by the hired family nannies, and seemingly didn't spend a lot of quality time with either of her parents. Mabel was an avid writer from the start, journaling everything she could. She was also fearless and wrote with intensity and passion, writing at least 4 full journals in her youth, just about how much she hated her parents. 4 full journals.
I was, as you were saying this, I was thinking, man, like I had like a couple diaries when I was a kid and would write like randomly a little bit here. And man, I wish I had done more. And then she had it by topic. And it sounds like this was a topic that she could talk about a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Like now we have therapists.
The thing that's amazing to me is that it's 4 journals just about hating
them.
her parents.
Yeah, I know.
And that's not including the countless other journals that she just filled tome after tome, seemingly.
Yeah. No,
It's
I mean,
amazing.
it's just, but think about it. There was no outlet for, I mean, obviously it was a very dysfunctional household. And
Right. She could read. There was no radio. There's no television. There's no network or internet to let her know, hey, other people feel this way and have crappy parents or whatever.
You're not alone.
Yep. So it was all just, let me be in my head and write it all out in 4 different journals, just in
Okay.
her youth. Sarah spent little time being a true mother to Mabel, and she left her alone often. Shocking. When Sarah took Mabel on trips to see her parents in New York, Sarah would leave Mabel with her parents most of the time so that she could go out dancing. However, Mabel's family vacations do give a fascinating insight of just how wealthy her lifestyle was, and what it was like for the ultra-rich at the time. On one occasion, when Mabel was 14, her parents decided to take a trip to the spa in upstate New York, and Mabel, being the ever-journaling person that she was, wrote a list of things the family brought for the trip. This list includes Mama, Papa, 3 maids, 2 dogs, 1 parrot, 1 pony, 1 cat, 10 satchels, and 3 trunks, etc. Unquote. Yes, Mabel had her own pony named Cupid.
Cupid! Aww.
Which, I mean, pretty inarguably is a fantastic name for a pony. Mabel loved Cupid, and she would hitch it up to a buggy so that she could drive the local children all around town in it. And somehow, she would actually have her Yorkshire Terrier ride on the back of the pony as she would go around town.
I'm envisioning this, and I like it. I'm not going to lie.
I would want to be friends with her as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
If I had a friend with a pony and a cart and their dog was riding on the back of it, best friends instantly. Now, when not on vacation with a pony, Mabel was enrolled at a prestigious all-girls school called Miss Graham's Young Ladies Boarding School in Manhattan, which is a fantastic name. I feel like that should be a fantasy place like Hogwarts. And it was there that, in my opinion, Mabel first started to discover herself. Now, Mabel hated Miss Graham's Young Ladies Boarding School in Manhattan, often writing to her mother about just how much she hated it, saying her schoolmates were boring and that her teachers were mean. However, she did start a friendship at the boarding school that would change her life forever. A friendship with Mary Shalito. Mary Shalito was a shy, nervous French girl who was made fun of often by her classmates for speaking poor, broken English. Her parents had relocated her and her sister Violet from Paris due to her father's business.
C'est la vie.
Mabel immediately liked her, as Mabel often did with anything out of the ordinary. Mabel and Mary quickly became friends, but before long, Mabel got exactly what she asked for. She would be going home. As it turns out, her mother actually took her complaints to heart and told Mabel that she could stay home after the Christmas holiday and that she would withdraw her as a student.
Aww.
I know, right? Which is, to me, like, pretty perfect for that time, because Mabel obviously didn't expect to be listened to by her mom, and her mom went, "No, I hear you. I'll just take you out of there." It was like the ultimate backfire.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, this meant Mabel would no longer be able to see Mary. Not ready to let their friendship die, they hatched a plan. Mary and her family took trips to Europe every summer, traveling around to various locations, but always stopping through Paris. So all Mabel needed to do was convince her mother Sarah to take a trip to Europe in the upcoming summer. Well, surprise, surprise, the pleasure-loving Sarah was shockingly easy to convince, and the next thing Mabel knew, her mother had booked a vacation to Paris, and they were checking into the Hotel Meurice, which, as an aside, is very interesting. It was opened in 1815. It is still a 5-star hotel to this day, and it sits next to the Louvre, Tuileries Garden, and the Place de la Concorde, which is this big courtyard in Paris. So if it says anything about where they're staying, it's basically the epicenter of coolness at the best place in Paris. That is where she's going on vacation at this point, probably about 14.
Okay, I'm like torn between feeling bad for her because her parents were like shitty and like she had a crappy boarding school and she just was having a rough time, but also this is pretty nice.
It's like a Nepo baby.
Yes.
Right? Where you're like, oh, I kind of feel bad for you because you didn't choose to be like a celeb, but like here you are.
Or like the royals when it's like
Right.
they are like, oh, it's so terrible, but also like you're a royal. Like, I don't know. But okay, I want to know more though. Please continue.
Yes. So this would be the first time that Mabel became aware of fashion and how to dress herself, as when Mary came to pick her up on the first day, Mabel saw a completely different side of Mary Shalito, one that wore a simple and elegant dress, composed and confident, free from the drab school uniform she had been forced to wear. Mabel said that it was in this moment she suddenly became aware of just how charmless her current costume was, and in the future would become something of a fashion icon.
Interesting.
We'll get there, though.
Okay.
Now, the Shalitos were also staying at the Hotel Meurice. So Mary and Mabel took the lift up to her family's suite, where Mary wanted to introduce Mabel to her sister, Violet. Since the beginning of their friendship, Mary had talked endlessly about her sister Violet, about how her effervescence and her brilliance. So Mabel had been building this moment up to a point of passionate anticipation. Super, super excited. To Mabel, the Shalito family was an exotic kind of fairy tale example about how the other side could live, but she herself did not. And it seems as though Violet was, in her mind, the ultimate culmination of that. Mabel had never met Violet, as Violet had been placed in a separate boarding school from Mary, so as not to allow them to speak French together and supposedly strengthen their English skills, which is like
that's
backwards.
weird.
I don't understand the Victorian thought when it comes to education on that one.
That's okay. Well, okay.
Yeah. In order to help these two people that can only speak French learn English better, you can't talk to each other in French anymore. You just have to be interacting with these mean people that make fun of you for not speaking English. It's like,
yeah, that's interesting.
All right. So the initial meeting between Mabel and Violet seems to be somewhat of a letdown, as Mabel doesn't seem to write anything of note regarding their first meeting, but her later writings do seem to give an indication as to how Mabel felt. Mabel wrote, quote, "Violet came gradually into one's perceptions, opening slowly like a flower that reveals its beauty bit by bit." Which is pretty...
Yeah, so she's got a thing for Violet?
Mabel's got a thing for everyone.
Okay.
Like, everyone. Okay. My father-in-law, I told you this a few weeks back. My father-in-law, who kind of was the guy that made me aware of this person, Mabel Dodge Luhan, he compared her to like a very early, remember this is around 1900 that she was really, young and up and coming. And this was through like the 30s and 40s kind of thing. She was kind of like an OG Paris Hilton or Kim Kardashian. Like, it's hard to put your finger on why are they so famous? Well, a lot of it comes from they had very famous and rich parents, so that enabled them to do all this kind of stuff that, anyway, she ended up being herself a more interesting character than the stuff that she actually produced. That's what ends up being so interesting about her, is that she was surrounded by all these crazy people, all these interesting people. She did a good amount of pretty good writing herself, but it's the sort of story of what she went through that makes it so entertaining. Again, sort of akin to Kim Kardashian or Paris Hilton. It's not because of their movies that they made that we're watching what they're doing.
It's not the necessarily some specific amazing skill or talent.
It's not their artistic output, let's say.
Yeah, it's they were there and they probably paid for the booze.
I mean, in a lot of cases, you're going to find out that's sort of what Mabel was. But
okay,
we're getting super far off track.
I love jumping forward, but let's stop.
No, that's it. This is great. All right. Now, Mabel was an extremely obsessive person and would write extensive, descriptive entries in her journal about nearly every person she met. Here's an example of a description that she wrote of a girl that she met in Richfield Springs. Name: Alice Howe. Age: 15 years. Goes to NY often. Size: small. Number of sisters: 4. She's the oldest. Youngest: 8 years. Color eyes: gray-blue. Beautiful complexion. Bad nose. Large mouth. Tannish brown straight hair in one braid. Small hands and feet. Dresses to her ankles. In winter lives in Summit, New Jersey. She was quite nice on the whole. ... Like I said, I think Mabel has a thing for everyone.
I mean, I've never really looked at someone's face and thought their mouth is good, but their nose is bad. Like, that's really specific. I usually think of things more on the whole rather than like...
Well, apparently she was quite nice on the whole. She like you.
Okay.
Obviously, she gave Violet the exact same analysis, with descriptions like a red-brown girl with a flat, slender body that swayed backward a little, hair soft and dark done in a knot on top of her head, eyes red-brown slanted up a little at corners, mouth drawn over slightly projecting teeth, which are not, however, as bad as Mary's. Nose sensitive, small, and high-bridged and delicately pointed. Delicious hands. Yes. That's my favorite description of all time, by the way. I've never heard somebody describe hands as delicious.
I don't even know what hands would be delicious. I mean, I only think of like when people hold babies and are like, look, I want to just eat your little hands.
I would think Paula Deen has really delicious hands.
I mean, they're probably coated in butter.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Please serve me everything, Paula Deen.
Now, about her character, Mabel described Violet as a relentlessly forgiving person, saying she, quote, completely understood everyone and would forgive them, unquote. Violet was, by all accounts, completely brilliant. She taught herself Italian at 16 so that she could read Dante. She learned Greek not long after, so she could read Plato and the dramatics. She casually attended the Sorbonne, which is the old term for what is now the University of Paris, to learn high mathematics, as she said, quote, for the beauty. Okay.
No, not for me.
Oh, nor me. Who in their right mind would do that? But this speaks to this like amazingly intelligent young woman who was able to learn Italian and Greek and then casually study high mathematics at the University of Paris.
Just because. Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty amazing.
That is amazing. It's also not for me.
Ditto that. Mabel was completely taken with Violet and wrote that she would love Violet forever, quote, because of her genius. And Violet seemed to love Mabel in turn. The two seemed to understand one another and the nature of the other person. In many ways, the friendship between Violet and Mabel grew past that of Mary and Mabel. Through their time together, Mabel was introduced to great authors like Alfred de Musset, George Sand, and Devigny, and great musical composers like Chopin and Beethoven. This was the beginning of Mabel's education and interest in the arts. For the first part of the summer, the Chalitos, along with Mabel and her mother, remained in Paris until the Chalitos decided to take a trip to the French countryside. The Chalitos invited Mabel along, while Sarah decided to stay in Paris. It was in a little cottage in the countryside of France where Mabel had her first homosexual experience, as Mabel shared a room and bed with Violet. Now, it's unclear as to the details of what happened, and frankly, who cares, right? But Mabel wrote that in the night she placed her hand on Violet's left breast and murmured, "I love you." To which Violet muttered back, "And I love you." And all night they laid like this. Now, how often the situation reoccurred or to what extent it continued on, we don't know. The summer carried on for a bit longer after that, but ultimately Mabel and the Chalitos parted ways, and Sarah took Mabel back to Buffalo despite Mabel's protests. No, sweet little...
And she was 14?
I think so. Maybe 16.
Maybe 16.
Mabel, it's also made very clear that she's very bad with timelines. She's like, she'll say, "Oh, and it was about this time that this happened," and there's no specific dates, and it's a pretty rough year.
She was like a high school kid with all the hormones and the emotions.
This is very, very fair. Yeah. Now, back in Buffalo, Sarah and Charlie Gansett decided that it was high time that their 17-year-old daughter started looking for a husband, lest she become an old maid.
Oh, yeah. What? How old was when I got married? Oh, yeah, 38.
Yeah, I was 27, 8, something like that.
No.
Yeah, so they were concerned. So yeah, this answers our question from a second ago. She was probably 16 when she
17.
came back and then turned 17 when she was in New York here.
Okay.
But Mabel seemed at first to be perfectly content meddling in other people's love lives instead of her own. In one example, she convinced her music teacher to pursue further art education in Munich rather than marry an insistent suitor. When Mabel succeeded in convincing the music teacher to leave the suitor, the music teacher howled at Mabel, shouting, "I've sent him away, it hurts so." To which Mabel said she felt, quote, "a thrill of delight."
Okay.
Though she did not know why. So again, we're getting into like, who is this person, right? It's like, you were many things. You weren't just this, like, you were kind of a manipulative, like
the puppet
controlling,
master.
kind of a person. You kind of got off on it, and it was sort of hilarious.
I mean, she probably learned a little of this behavior from her wonderful parents,
100%.
the letter writing father and
100%.
whatnot. Yeah.
And him saying, "I hate your mother," and all that kind of stuff. Yes, Mabel seemed to be enamored with drama and quickly realized her effect on men, noting that she was able to, quote, "upset them to her heart's content." In addition to this, Mabel found that she seemed to have an even more heightened effect on older men, after which she became infatuated with a married man named Seward Carey. One of Mabel's earliest memories as a child was looking out of her window to see her neighbor, Emily Scatcherd, dressed in her wedding gown, being loaded into a carriage on her way to marry Seward Carey. But as Mabel grew older, she began to see Seward in a different way. He was a passionate and skilled horse trainer, best known for his ability to break horses and train them for drawn carriages. Mabel was enthralled and soon began joining Seward on his escapades, breaking green horses and getting them used to having a rider. She even cut her hair short, a very taboo style for a female at the time, and took to wearing boots and pants. Scandal. Pants.
The garments of the devil.
Right? Which anatomically makes so much more sense for a woman to wear pants than a man. Like, a man should wear a skirt anatomically. It makes so much more sense.
Wait. Oh,
The Scots had it right, is all I'm saying.
yeah. Okay.
Anyway,
Never
that's a lovely segue.
Never thought that much about it, but okay.
All right. So, despite what you might be thinking, no, they did not have a physical relationship. Mabel described the relationship as that of a friendship, and that she was quoted as saying she just wasn't ready for anything sexual at the time, despite C-word making the occasional pass.
I mean,
like,
how much older was he than her?
well, I mean, I'd imagine at least like 20, 25 years older, right? Because if he was getting married when he was like 20 or something, and one of her earliest memories, like
Then
3,
she was probably maybe 3 or 5 years
yeah,
old.
like, so he had to have been a good amount older. I mean, whatever.
15. Yeah. Well, also, when you're younger too, though, you always think that people that are older than you are much older than you too.
True. And I mean, whatever. I don't mean to judge anything. If this is your love relationship, it's all good. Live your life.
I mean,
this is he was married. That's the biggest thing for me in this situation.
He was
It's like,
married
hey,
and he
girl,
was
come on.
significantly older.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay.
Right. Now, we are arriving at Mabel turning 18, and with it, her parents planned her debut. However, like all things with Mabel, traditional and ordinary were boring. For Mabel's debut, tradition went out the window, and she insisted that the Ganses employ her art teacher as the decorator for the event, and that the theme be baronial, which I did have to Google for sure. Okay, it's of a baron.
Okay.
Yeah, so like think of a royal baron. That's the adjective for it is
I'm
baronial.
seeing like a large bald man with one of those fluffy collars, and like those floofy pants, kind of, and some tights and.
Yes, add in the red baron's curly mustache.
Oh,
which you need, I think, for a baron.
Oh yes,
I
indeed.
just think is the only way that you can be a baron. So, anyways, that is what baronial means, and that's how she wanted her party to be themed. To achieve this effect, the venue was plastered with fake family portraits that emulated the Renaissance and artists like Rembrandt and Velázquez. Banners and coats of arms were displayed around the venue, and old tables and chairs were set to match the picture frames. And Mabel insisted that guests dress in medieval costumes, which is awesome.
So she basically invented medieval times?
Kind of, in her own home. She was like, hey, let's do medieval times, but as my party as a debutante.
As like her super sweet 16, but 18?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. The event was so grand that even Mary and Violet Shalito came to town to celebrate, though Mabel was so busy with parties and dating that she did not see Violet or Mary at the time, much to her later regret. Mabel's debut ended when her father decided that enough was enough. He stomped out to the middle of the dance floor, he hissed at the musicians and told them to play Home Sweet Home.
So like the closing time of the day?
Exactly. Like the one last call, guys. I'm done. You get out of here. You had your party, you had your food, you had your wine. Go.
I'm tired of paying by the drink.
Thankfully, though, Charlie was known to be this way, so the guests just laughed, clapped, and filed out once the song was over. When the Gansons finally got home from the party, Sarah turned to Mabel and simply said, quote, "Well, that's over with," and walked into her room. Now, despite having her debut, Mabel didn't marry for another 2 years. Carl Evans, Mabel's first husband, was a seemingly typical member of the Buffalo elite and lived only a few blocks away from the Gansons. His father was the president of the Anchor Line Steamboat Company, and Carl, the youngest of his brothers, was placed into a nominal position at the steamboat company, which suited him just fine as he was an outdoorsman who hated being locked in an office. Carl was a hunter, fisherman, boating expert, and all-around outdoorsman. Mabel described him as rugged-faced, with a long upper lip and crooked smile. Carl liked Mabel because she could keep up with his outdoor lifestyle and affectionately took to calling her Peg, but I have no idea why.
I mean, Peggy is what, a nickname for something that I can't remember. Like something I don't even know.
I have no idea. Either way, he called her Peg, so I think that's kind of fun. Mabel later recalled, quote, "He seemed amusing to her, rather like a nice dog." And that the most interesting thing about him was his time spent in the, quote, Indian, territory, where he was taken in by a tribe of Native Americans and treated as one of their own. Mabel said she found him most attractive when he dressed up in his Native American buckskins. Which,
Buckskins.
like, I mean, I just have to imagine Mabel one night being like, Carl, can you put on your buckskins?
Dear.
And him being like, okay, babe.
Okay, Peg.
Okay, Peggy, no problem. And then going off and putting on his buckskins and come back and be like, how you doing?
Okay, but that is interesting. I mean, I'm sure that a lot of the guys up in Buffalo at the time were like pretty boring.
No, I'm not poo-pooing it. I think
No,
it's
I know.
amazing.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying like that. I can see why she thought he was interesting enough.
Totally.
She definitely seems like the kind of person whose mind is always all over the place. And so,
It is.
yeah, out of necessity, if I must take a husband, I guess it will be the one who spent the time with the Native
Yeah.
Americans.
I mean, we're gonna find as we get deeper and deeper into Mabel's life, this is like classic. If somebody is not famous and or having some type of notoriety or some type of royalty or something, she'll invent one
Mm-hmm.
in her own mind. Like,
Mhm.
oh, they must be this way because of this. And we'll see these examples later on of how she actually had to, again, invent backstories. It's wild. Now, the story of how Mabel came to be married to Carl Evans is debated, and the only real account we have is Mabel's own. According to Mabel, when she and Carl began to date, Carl was already engaged to another woman, a beautiful blonde in Buffalo named Elsie. But now that Carl had met Mabel, he said he didn't love Elsie anymore. But Carl told Mabel this was awkward because Elsie was still, quote, really serious about the engagement.
I mean, if you're engaged, I think you're
Is
probably...
there any other thing you can be about an
Yeah.
engagement? But that was what he told her, apparently. This was apparently the exact right thing to say to rev Mabel's engine, as she would later write in her memoirs that, quote, the fact that Carl was engaged to another girl enhanced his desirability.
I mean, you always want what you can't have.
Oh, gosh, she's such a kid. Okay. One night, knowing that Carl was with Elsie at her house, Mabel called Elsie's house, asked to speak with Carl, and demanded that he come to her house at once. Again, according to Mabel, Carl got up to leave, but Elsie got in his way, demanding that he stay. But Carl, in a fit of passion, pushed Elsie to the floor, where she began to cry. Carl ignored her incredulous screams and rushed to Mabel's house, explaining what had happened, and when he got there, he screamed, I want you! Mabel screamed back in response to Carl's story, and it was at this moment that Carl asked her to marry him, to which Mabel agreed. Mabel later wrote that she said yes, not out of love, but out of a desire to prove her power.
Okay, you remember that meme of that little girl in front of the burning house?
Yes, that is exactly it. Oh my gosh, that is really funny. But I mean, imagine that, like this whole scene of her breaking up an engagement, only for her to be like, I don't really love him. I just want to prove my power.
That is like...
It's messed up, dude.
That is messy.
It's not good. I said at the beginning of this, she is not a perfect person by any stretch of the imagination.
It is making me think back. What was the show with Paris and what's her face and like
Simple Life?
Simple Life.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
It's
it's like reality TV, but it's not made up.
Yeah, that's as I was reading through all of this, I was just like, this I keep getting to these moments of going, you cannot write this. You cannot write this. This is where this stuff comes from, is this type of drama from these old people, these old Victorians, man. It's wild.
I
Now-
declare.
The amount of like affairs and stuff that were going on, like just casually, you have no idea. It's so much more than I ever would have thought it would have been. Anyway, we'll get there, I promise. It wasn't long after this that Mabel detailed her unexpected marriage to Carl. According to Mabel, Carl had arranged for the pair of them to take a trolley trip up to Lewiston, as Carl had a friend who drove a trolley car. The three made their way up there in the trolley car, hunting for game along the way, but having no luck. Once the three arrived, Carl insisted they visit a small church on the top of the hill. Upon walking into the church, Mabel saw, at the altar, a minister in full robes holding a Bible. Carl had arranged a surprise wedding, and their trolley car driver was to be the witness. Mabel later wrote that in that moment, she did not want to marry Carl, but in her words, quote, what was I to do? When all was said and done, Mabel and Carl ran from the church back to the trolley car, laughing and smiling as husband and wife. And that she actually did write that. So I don't know how you can go from being like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do, to like laughing and frolicking down the hill. But hey.
I mean, there's obviously a lot to the psychology of this woman, but
it's also pretty important to remember too, and Emily Hahn, who wrote the main book that I read, often points out that when Mabel wrote most of what she wrote it on her fourth marriage. So a lot of it is kind of coming from this standpoint of, well, this is the most important one. The fourth one is the most important. So I'm going to mitigate all of these other ones and all these other romances and loves as much as I can, because really the one that I was building up to that was the most important was this fourth and final one. So it's kind of an interesting psychological viewpoint when you're actually reading her work too.
Well, I mean, also when you're I guess she was 20 because she had her coming out party and it was 2 years later. But when you're young and like there's expectations and, you know, you've got the family wanting you to do the things and, you know, this is kind of a fairy tale, like a little bit of a surprise. And he is interesting enough and he dumped this other person for me. And like that just like messy stuff that when you're young, you're like, oh my gosh, this is it.
True.
I mean, also, she does seem like the kind of person that, I don't know, may have been like, nothing is permanent, even though like in the time it was permanent enough, like you couldn't get a divorce very easily. So maybe she was just like, whatever, I'm going with it. I don't know.
I think that's probably pretty fair to say. I mean, she, in many ways like that, was ahead of her time. And she was, I mean, I would say the definition of marching by the beat of your own drum. There are many examples throughout her life where she does the exact opposite of what society says you should do or you should be or you should think. And it's in 1904 when she's doing it and thinking it and saying it. So one of the reasons I really like her is that she's crazy, but she's also like has cool principles and evolves over time too. So, and we'll see that a lot. Once Mabel and Carl arrived back in Buffalo, it seemed to be life as usual. In true Mabel fashion, she didn't tell her parents and told Carl not to tell his.
So was she just living at home while married to Carl?
Well, check this out. For now, their marriage was to be a secret, or at least so Mabel claims. Okay? Soon after their marriage, Mabel and Carl found and bought a house, and Mabel wrote in her later book, European Experiences, that many of her friends came by to say hello as she was painting the interior. Now, how is it possible that all of her friends know of her marriage in a small, gossip-ridden town of 1901 Buffalo, but her parents do not, you might ask? I don't know. That doesn't make sense to me.
There was no social media?
No tagged photos?
Yeah, no, like that's, I mean, a tagged photo is pretty much how you expose a secret marriage accidentally.
But I'm just, I don't know. I don't really buy that this whole thing went down the way that it went down, just because I cannot imagine all of her friends not mentioning something to one of their parents, and the word gets around, man.
How many years was it from like when this marriage occurred to when she was writing about it in the book you just referenced?
Like 30 plus.
So decades and decades. I mean, and I think she probably
25 to 30. Yeah.
She probably did some like alcohol and drugs in between there. Or was she not really? Anyway,
yeah, but
regardless,
not
time changes your memory a bit too.
Exactly.
And you know, things get more exciting as you retell them if you feel like they want to get that way.
But Mabel said they didn't know. She said her parents didn't know. When the time finally came, they informed Carl's parents with little to no negative reaction. But Mabel's parents, the Gansons, that was a different matter. Mabel and Carl were more or less terrified of how the Gansons would react. So, rather than just being upfront, Carl had an idea. Dr. Parmenter.
Dr. Parmenter?
Dr. Parmenter. Now, Dr. John Parmenter was the Evans family physician. He was well respected in the community and known for wise fatherly advice. Surely, Dr. Parmenter would know what to do. So Carl called him on the telephone, and the three soon met. Mabel and Carl told Dr. Parmenter of their situation, to which he agreed to be the bearer of bad news to the Gansons, but under the condition that Mabel and Carl appear immediately after the news was delivered in order to speak with the Gansons directly. They both agreed. That evening, Dr. Parmenter dropped by the Ganson home to find Sarah alone. Once the news of their secret marriage had been delivered, Mabel and Carl appeared to speak with Sarah. Sarah cried a bit at the news, but ultimately accepted their marriage under the condition that they be, quote, well and truly married all over again by 3 different church dignitaries. Grandma Ganson's minister, Sarah Ganson's high church priest, and the Bishop of New York State.
Okay.
It's not official enough with just one, obviously. You have to have, like, you got to cover your bases just in case God is looking at him and going like, well, but the high priest, that one doesn't count really. It's actually the bishop. That's the right one. But we don't know. I get it.
I mean, I was thinking that they would be upset because, like, she was very wealthy and they'd be concerned that he was going to, like, take her money or like...
No, because he was so wealthy. Remember, he's the son of the steamboat company.
The steamboat. So they're all wealthy.
They're all wealthy. They're all rolling in it. There's no issues here.
Okay.
So, but this is just proper. I mean, you also have to remember Mabel's probably 20 at this point. So her mom's going like, well, this is just what you do. This is Buffalo, New York. And, you know, basically.
I know, but they made her have a debutante ball. So, like, that's to put her out in society for marriage.
That's true.
It worked.
I don't know.
You got your
maybe
just
it was
desserts,
just that she was
Sarah.
afraid they weren't going to be copacetic with it. Or
if
whatever.
you weren't all dancing around Paris, Sarah, you might know what your daughter was up to.
If you'd been paying closer attention, maybe you would
Yeah,
know.
you were just saying you weren't sure how they couldn't know, but it sounded like they were pretty,
That's
self-absorbed
fair.
people.
That's very fair. All right. The two agreed, and the subsequent wedding was an extravagant affair, with Mabel wearing ivory satin and 6 accompanying bridesmaids. Although Mabel's father, Charlie, did not attend the ceremony due to a supposed case of bad gout. It is very possible that the gout was a scapegoat illness, and that he just didn't do it in protest. Which is like, I don't understand why. Like, what's the deal, dude?
I mean, obviously, if it's not in the pages of history that you've read, maybe there's a little more to it, or maybe it's a little I don't know.
He didn't like it, so he said he had bad gout and didn't go to the ceremony. So that's Charlie.
I mean,
Ganson
gout
for you.
is painful, I hear.
Hey, I don't have it, so I don't know. Not my life.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. Now, soon after this, Mabel had her first orgasm. I know. Despite writing about previous experiments with sex, Mabel had never actually heard of an orgasm and described the feeling as, quote, this is one of my favorite things ever, okay? Silent, fiery fountains falling on black velvet. Kind of metal, right?
Silent, fiery fountains falling on black velvet.
I don't know why. I think that's a great description.
Okay, I'm like seeing this blur of like a Georgia O'Keeffe painting and then like the cover of Dante's Inferno right now.
Hey, I like it. I support it. However, in all of these descriptions, she did not include Carl. And Emily Hand, the author of Mabel, a biography of Mabel Dodge Luhan, describes it as, quote, saying, as if it had happened to her alone.
Hey, self-love is love.
Hey, that's all good. It wasn't long after this, however, that Mabel became pregnant with her one and only child, John. The pregnancy was difficult, and by all accounts, Mabel seemed to be suffering from depression during this time, and even for a very long while after the birth. Mabel was always a sickly person, even as a child, had been prescribed sulfur water as a treatment for her ailments.
Oh,
I know.
I'm so glad we live now.
Which, I mean, let's be honest. Like, sulfur water, it has to be fart water, right? Like, that is what it's going to be smelling and tasting like.
But it cleans out your innards.
Oh, gosh. Her pregnancy seemed to mirror this, and within a few months of discovering her pregnancy, was ordered to stay in bed by her doctor, Dr. Parmenter, due to fear...
He strikes again!
Due to fear of her miscarrying. Mabel seemed to relish her time in bed, however, and took to reading and writing often. She had a difficult labor, but ultimately successful, with John Evans weighing in at a whopping 13 pounds.
Oh, God.
Oh. Carl was immediately taken with John and commented that he was, quote, a wonder, and looked 3 months old at birth.
Yeah, when you're 13 pounds, that's about right.
Mabel, on the other hand, awoke after giving birth with a deep feeling of depression and refused to look at her new baby. Mabel later wrote of the episode, quote, I didn't like it, by which I don't mean little John in particular, but the whole system, which I kind of get, Mabel's depression was such that she did not produce milk and refused to look at little John for days. Thankfully, John thrived on baby formula and was growing strong and healthy. Mabel admitted to eventually getting over her active dislike of him, but said she had no love for him, and she felt sorry for him because of it.
That's really sad. And it's interesting, though, just in the last few years, we as a human society have been like, postpartum depression is a real thing.
Totally.
And here she is more than a century ago, like experiencing it and talking about it later and all that stuff. And I mean, it's very common.
I totally agree. And it's amazing even further that she wrote about it so extensively, in my opinion.
Yeah. And Dr. Parmenter didn't know what he was doing, it seems. He probably prescribed her, like laudanum and an orgasm. I'm
shocked you know what laudanum is, and we're going to talk about that later. That's awesome. That's amazing. Now, what Mabel was not telling us this entire time, however, was that she was having an affair with Dr. Parmenter.
He's my favorite character in this besides her.
Now, if you remember, Dr. Parmenter's first name was John. Mabel's first child's name was John.
Oh my gosh.
Now, nothing in anything I have read has speculated on this, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that Mabel had been having an affair with Dr. Parmenter for some time, and that under the guise of telling Carl it was in tribute to Dr. Parmenter, Mabel was in fact naming her son John Jr.
Oh my gosh.
Scandal, scandal, scandal.
So was Carl like impotent maybe?
I don't know this. This is, again, very much speculation on my part. This could be totally false. It just seems like a shocking coincidence to me that of all the names you could pick out, you go with the doctor you are having an affair with currently and probably were for a while. That seems like too much of it's so on the nose.
It is on the nose, but also, let's see, she had 3 men of God marry her, and John, Paul, whatever.
George and Ringo.
But no, like the Gospel of John. So it was like
it's totally fair.
It's possible.
It is entirely possible that I am
pretty
totally
big
wrong. It just seems to me.
By the way, if any descendants of any of the people that we're speaking about right now are on this podcast because
listening.
A Google alert went off or something, we're just playing around. We don't know.
Hey, and keep listening, because before long we're gonna have an email you can email us at, and you can just tell us exactly how wrong we are.
We
need
should
to do
make that later.
Let's make a checklist of things that we need to do for
I can
this.
get my notes out. Where's our intern?
Gosh, dang it. All right. Now, very little else is mentioned about Dr. Parmenter by Mabel, but it is worth noting that it was a bit of a scandal in Buffalo at the time. Mabel and John Parmenter had a passionate love affair, even to the point that his wife found out about it and threatened to go to the press to smear his name and business right along with Mabel. They both saw reason and ultimately decided to break things off, and that was that.
Man.
Fun.
Really messy. I like it.
About a year later, Mabel was recovering from surgery related to her difficult childbirth when Dr. Parmenter dropped by in the morning. Bad news. Carl had been shot.
Oh my gosh.
I know. Carl had been out duck hunting that morning when his hunting companion accidentally shot him in the back with a shotgun. He lay in critical condition at the hospital and was asking to see Mabel. Mabel, recovering from surgery, later dramatically recounted that she somehow managed to get herself out of bed into the hospital just in time for Carl to say that it wasn't his friend's fault, and then died.
I have so many thoughts and questions, and oh my gosh.
It's just like,
I did not see this coming.
Right? I love that she gets there, by the way, and it's like, Carl, oh, my Carl. And he's like, it wasn't his fault. No I love yous. No take care of little John for me. To my knowledge,
Carl was having an affair with his hunting buddy.
With Dr. Parmenter.
What if Dr. Parmenter was in the middle of all of this? Where was he?
They were in a throuple.
Was he hunting?
It was around this time.
Sorry. I just want to name a goldfish Dr. Parmenter or something.
You should.
Oh my gosh.
If we make t-shirts, we'll make a Dr. Parmenter, like, ooh, we should have one that says Dr. Parmenter was here.
Dr. Parmenter was everywhere.
With like a little medical cross or something. That'd be amazing.
Oh my gosh.
All right, now, it was around this time that Mabel's father, Charlie Ganson, also died.
Oh, she's having a rough time.
So she and her mother were both now widows. Mabel was 22 years old and her son was 1. Over the next 2 years, Mabel had a nervous breakdown and life seemed to kind of putter on. To her credit, Sarah saw that Mabel was doing poorly, so she decided that Mabel needed to change the scenery and sent her off to Paris with John and 2 nurses, one for each of them. This was 1902. Aboard the ship, Mabel initially seemed to be a sad and mopey presence, hardly leaving her deck recliner and frequently requesting servers bring her drinks and food. Which, let's be honest, Mabel knows how to cruise.
I mean,
that's
that
the right
sounds like the way to do it.
Like,
yeah.
I don't know how that's a sad and mopey presence. That sounds like what a cruise should be, is moping around on your deck chair and saying, Garçon, bring me a drink.
I'd like a Bellini and, I don't know, some fancy cheese.
Yeah, this was said in a very, like, sort of bad way. Like, she was just sitting around on her chair.
What else are you going to do on a ship
like
like that across the Atlantic? Are you going to, like, play shuffleboard?
Right. She's already written 4 journals about how much she hates her parents. What else is she going to do?
And her mother just sent her to Paris, which is like, okay, what are you going to do? Write about how much you hate your mother who sends you to wonderful Paris?
Exactly.
I mean, nothing a nice cafe au lait and a croissant cannot fix.
Exactly. I'm completely with Mabel on this one. I don't see any issues with this. Trip, however, was looking to be eventless until one fateful night. The last night of the journey before arriving in Le Havre, and I think I'm saying that right, is Le Havre? Anyway.
Spanish. I don't know.
Mabel was invited to dine with the other passengers, and for once, she agreed. It was at this dinner table that she met a man named Edwin Dodge.
Okay, wait. Hold on. Dodge. Might she marry him in the future?
I don't know. Why are you getting that from?
He's an opportunist. I like this.
He was an architect from Boston who took an immediate liking to Mabel. They got along well together, and she immediately liked him in return. The next morning, the ship docked at Le Havre, and Mabel made her way into the ocean of people on the dock. Edwin Dodge was lost in the shuffle of the crowd, but as he got into his cab, he saw Mabel in the distance, caught her eye, and lifted his hat to politely depart, which is pretty classy.
Yeah.
Now, the plan was for Mabel to arrive in Le Havre, where the Sholito family would receive her, where they would then make their way to Paris. Sure enough, Mary Sholito and her father were waiting for Mabel and John. But more bad news. Mother Sholito and Violet were both dead.
No!
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
It is not said what illness Violet suffered from, but her death was, by all accounts, slow and painful, and she joined the Catholic Church in her final days in search of salvation and hospice care. On her deathbed, Violet told Mary that she was, quote, bequeathing a friendship. Violet told Mary that Mabel was now to be dear friends with Marcel Senard. Now, I'm not sure if it's Marcel or Marshall. I think I'm just going to say Marcel because that seems more French. If this situation sounds strange, that's because it is.
Who bequeaths a friendship?
Exactly. Violet had become dear friends with Marcel Senard and insisted that Mabel and her now be friends after her death, and that as soon as Mabel came to France, she was to go stay with Marcel and her family at their house in Burgundy. Mabel was obviously unsure of the entire situation. Oddly enough, Marcel was insistent that Mabel come and join her family in Burgundy with John, but not the 2 nurses, as Marcel and her family had everything they would need.
Probably a lot of their own nurses.
I would imagine.
Also, how does Mary feel about all this? Isn't Mary like, I was your friend first?
Strangely, she's into it. Like, Mary was the one that came over to Mabel and was like, hey, Violet on her deathbed. She's bequeathing.
Like, so she's cool with the fact that, like, she became friends with Mabel first, and then her sister was like, there was some stuff going on. And then her sister was like, oh my gosh, I've got to introduce you to my new friend. Because I feel like in modern day, there'd be a little bit of jealousy. Like, I'm thinking of, like, Mean Girls and, okay.
I don't know. I honestly don't know what this was.
Maybe Mary's just a friendly friend.
Yeah.
Mary's just like, hey, more the merrier.
And
the merrier.
Oh, God.
Somebody stop me.
I can't.
be quiet now.
Oh my God,
Please continue.
No, that's good. I liked it. No, I think that Mary Sholito and Violet Sholito were both just very, I mean, for lack of a better term, very French people, right? Where like those types of things, those sort of like lovers' spats of jealousy or whatever. Obviously, I'm not saying the French are not, if they're immune to this or something, but it seems like there's an attitude in France that's a little bit more like, hey, love is love.
Did you watch Emily in Paris?
No, I heard she's a terrible person, though.
Well, I just watched the first season, and I just do know that there's an affair, and then like she finds out about the affair, and then she says something, and then the other person's like, well, of course my husband knows I'm having an affair.
I just read a thread on Reddit a few weeks back that was like, who's a television character protagonist who you're supposed to think is amazing, who's actually
she's
a terrible
like super
person.
Annoying. She's super
and they were
annoying.
like, Emily in Paris, and I was like, cool, never watching that.
Okay, hopefully Mabel in Paris is not the same. Anyway, keep going.
Well, anyhow, after this invitation to go stay at the Senard Burgundy cottage, Mabel needed to think about it. The next day, Mabel went out shopping and bought herself a broad-brimmed black and transparent ostrich feather hat and a short black cape. On her way back to the Hotel Maurice, where obviously she was staying, she bumped into who else but Edwin Dodge, who, of course, was staying at the Maurice as well.
Well, I mean, all the movers and shakers were there.
She hadn't gotten there yet. We're not there yet. The two got to chatting, but before long, Mary Sholito interrupted the two as Mabel and Mary had made plans for lunch together. Edwin and Mabel had dinner that night and had such a wonderful time that Edwin asked to see Mabel again the next night. Alas! Mabel had already committed to having dinner with Mary Sholito and her father the next night. Edwin moped and pleaded and begged Mabel to cancel her plans with the Sholitos. Surely, Mabel, you can make up some kind of sickness, right? Maybe a bad headache or a fever? So Mabel thought it over, and she really was having a good time with Edwin, and if you think about it, she's really going to be doing the Sholitos a huge favor by going out to the countryside and see Marcel, and she doesn't even know, and who knows when she's going to get to see Edwin after this, and she's going to see the Sholitos the entire time she's in Burgundy, Mabel's thinking. After a bit of thought, she agrees, and the next day writes a note to Mary to be delivered by the hotel staff. Okay. In the letter, Mabel tells Mary about how sick she is feeling and how she can't possibly go out to dinner with them tonight and that she's so sorry. Later that night, Edwin picked up Mabel and promised to take her to the loveliest little pavilion restaurant in Paris. The two walked inside to find a table, and who should be sitting at the restaurant staring straight at Mabel?
The Sholitos?
Mary Sholito and her father.
Mm-hmm. I saw that one coming.
She could do nothing but swallow her embarrassment, find a table, and carry on her night while occasionally catching awkward glances from the Sholitos. Even worse, when Mabel got back to her hotel room, she found that Mary had sent a dozen roses to her room for every hour since receiving the note that Mabel was sick.
Oh my gosh.
So she came back to her hotel room to find like 8 dozen roses.
Oh my
everywhere
gosh.
From Mary Sholito, just being like, I'm so sorry you're sick. Mabel dressed in all black the next day to confront Mary. Mary was tearfully upset, pushed off Mabel's apologies, and demanded that Mabel go to Burgundy as repayment, to which Mabel finally accepted. Of note, Mr. Sholito commented on the evening, calling Mabel déclassée.
I'm guessing not classy.
Yes, but that Edwin Dodge really knows his Paris. Which is like the best freaking burn ever, man. I love it.
Oh my gosh. But yeah, I mean, there's only apparently one hotel and one restaurant in Paris.
I just thought that was so good that he's like, Mabel's déclassée, but that Edwin Dodge, he really knows.
Oh
But he knows
God.
what he's talking about.
Too funny.
Later that morning, Edwin came to the dining room for breakfast where Mabel told him she'd be going to Burgundy, and Edwin was heartbroken. Mabel arrived in Burgundy the next day to meet Marcel. Mabel describes her as a good-looking, dark-haired young woman, but rather austere. Beyond this, not a lot is known. The two talked a lot about Violet and seemed to be drawn to one another, but by her second day in Burgundy, she received a letter from Edwin Dodge begging her to come back to Paris. It was with this letter that Mabel realized the surroundings that she was currently in, and the old, sluggish world that it represented. Mabel wanted to be in Paris, around whatever adventures that might bring, and she decided that she must return. By the 4th day in the chateau in Burgundy, Mabel had received a 3rd letter from Edwin and decided to leave for Paris. As a, quote, sign of good faith, however, she left John and the nurses at the chateau.
She just dumped her kid at these
Yeah,
random
and
people's
apparently she
chateau.
brought the nurses with her too, by the way. Like, she ignored that request.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Well.
She was like, screw it, I'm bringing them anyways. With that, she packed up her things and headed to Paris and towards her second marriage. Edwin, however, was so smitten with Mabel that he couldn't possibly sit around waiting in Paris, so he hopped on a train to meet her at the halfway point. When the two were finally joined together on the train back to Paris, Edwin asked Mabel to be his wife. Mabel gave him the old maybe.
I was going to say, that escalated quickly, Edwin.
Yeah, like a week, right? And he's like, marry me. So she said maybe. In later writings, Mabel wrote of her feelings towards Edwin at the time, saying that she knew she didn't love him, going as far as to say that she told this to Edwin directly. However, this didn't seem to deter Edwin Dodge at all, and he insisted that they could build something beautiful together. Apparently, one of Edwin's selling points to Mabel was that, quote, hey, I'm an architect. Just think of all the rooms that you'll get to decorate.
I mean, fair point.
Hilariously, this actually seemed to check the final box for Mabel, and she agreed.
Okay, I think I said earlier she seems like a bit of an opportunist. And let's be clear. Hold on. She is a 22-year-old widow with a 1-year-old.
Hey.
It's not like she's, other than the fact that she's incredibly, alluring, it seems, to people.
She's single. I'm not judging it.
Yeah.
Go for it. Get that paper, girl.
Yeah. Early 1900s,
So once the two had come to a decision on marriage, Mabel insisted that they return to Buffalo so that they could meet her relatives and announce the news.
She gonna pick up her kid at any point?
I honestly didn't even think about that.
No, and John grew up in France. The end.
It is kind of funny because, like, John is there, but, like, when he's mentioned throughout most of her life, it's like, oh yeah, and then John was there too. Like, that's most of the time what it is. It's like he is not a central figure in her life.
And, like, you've told me a little bit about her, and then I did start reading that other book about that woman that, like, also moved to Taos to kind of learn about Mabel.
Oh, yeah.
And I can't remember what it's called or who wrote it, and I will look it up later. But, it was talking a little bit about Mabel and all the time she spent in Taos, and I had no clue that she had a child.
Yeah. And
So-
that's exactly right for what Mabel wrote, is that John seemed to be a footnote, in my opinion, to her entire existence.
I mean, now I have a lot of questions about, like, did John have children, and are there descendants of him around
actually,
and stuff?
a lot of the information that we have on Mabel that is not coming from Mabel herself, that's just very personal, is from John's wife, actually.
Oh, okay.
And when he died, she lived at least until the 70s, where Emily Hahn, who wrote Mabel, the biography that I mostly read here, she actually interviewed her and asked for a lot of opinions on Mabel. And she's actually one of the ones that provided the information on Sarah Ganson, who actually said, hey, Mabel described her as this mean, nasty, quiet person, but she's the only one that described her that way. Everybody else knew Sarah Ganson to be this lovely, vivacious, fun-loving person.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's how we know a lot.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, once the two had come to a decision on marriage, Mabel insisted, I already read this, that they go back and announce the news.
Yes,
So,
Buffalo. We're back to Buffalo. Hopefully
we're
with
already
John.
back in Buffalo. Edwin wholeheartedly agreed, but was rightfully bewildered by Mabel's next condition. Edwin was to come back to the Sennards' family chateau in Burgundy and deliver the news to Marshall in person.
And Marshall's a woman?
Yes.
Okay.
Despite the bizarre request, Edwin agreed and accompanied Mabel back to Burgundy. Edwin and Mabel arrived at the chateau to announce the news, and Marshall was, needless to say, upset. Just prior to leaving the chateau, Marshall was pleading with Mabel to stay. Through this argument, Marshall started asking, searching for reasons as to why Mabel needed to leave. Was it because Edwin was a man? She asked. Because if so, Marshall could provide Mabel men, even though Marshall herself found them repulsive. Given Marshall's intense Catholic devotion, Mabel knew this to mean the Catholic priests in Burgundy.
Ew.
So Marshall was basically like, dude, if you want a guy, I got a priest for you.
Ew.
Yeah, kind of not great.
Golly, there's a whole other topic, but whoa.
Mabel said this gave her a mixed feeling of dread and temptation.
Well, yeah, because she's a puppet master, so she's like, if I can have a few,
if I can mess around with a
priests
priest
on my strings.
Gosh. The couple stayed in the chateau for a few more days, but due to Marcel's relentless attempts to convert Mabel to Catholicism, Edwin took the two of them back to Paris to plan their wedding. The two were married in Paris in a seemingly small ceremony, but Grandma Ganson did manage to make it out. It was early October, and the two immediately left for Biarritz following the ceremony. Now, of the wedding night, she does write about how lackluster it was, but it's important to remember that when she wrote it, she was on to her fourth marriage, like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, it was many decades later, and
right.
she'd had more fun since then. So I get it.
So yeah, it's who knows if that's actually true or not, but she says that it was kind of lackluster.
Maybe this is why Edwin was so pushy, is because he didn't have much luck with the ladies or something?
We'll get to know Edwin Dodge a little bit more, was not a great dude either.
Yeah, well, it seems very manipulative and love bomby. So,
yeah, that's kind of fair, but he's a weird figure. We'll talk about him a lot more.
Okay.
Either way, we really don't know how Mabel and Edwin Dodge got along physically, but Mabel did write that, quote, "It was never right after that first night." Yeah. It seems like Mabel was much more interested in romance than love, as soon as the two were married, something switched in her. Everything annoyed her. The hotel was terrible, and everything in it was tacky. She approved of nothing and made no attempt to be cheerful. She started into retail therapy and bought clothes and house decorations like it was going out of style. After a time, Edwin got so fed up with her that he shouted, quote, "Well, if this is marriage, excuse me." Which apparently at the time was really strong words. Like, because she was like, "How dare you?" Like, that's a big thing to say.
Well, I mean, in French, it would be "excusez-moi."
Excusez-moi. But yes, that's what he said.
Interesting.
The honeymoon finally ended, and the two decided to look for a villa on the Italian Riviera. True to form for the time, Mabel wasn't pleased with any of the villas they looked at. When they looked at villas that overlooked the ocean, Mabel said she, quote, "found the sea insincere and that the spot lacked privacy." It's like, F you, dude. Shut up.
Yeah.
Seriously, come on. Finally, the two settled on a place, but Mabel didn't love it and said that it had too many flowers around it. This is not a complaint. This is... Who?
I mean, unless you have really bad allergies or something.
But she didn't. She just was like, "There's too many flowers." She was just looking for something to complain about. She was all pissy. I get it. You can be pissy. It's fine. It's just one of those where I'm like, girl, you're on the Italian Riviera shopping for villas, and your biggest complaint is the one that I bought has too many flowers.
Yeah, I don't know. It sounds like something pretty bad may have happened on that wedding night, though. She might have been in. This may be her way of fighting back.
This is very fair. That is very fair. She moped around the house, taking to writing long letters to friends while Edwin played tennis at the local tennis club. One night in the wee hours of Mabel's misery, she called out to the spirit of her deceased friend Violet, asking for a sign that she was close to Mabel. A moment later, out of the silence, Mabel heard a small clank, china on china, followed by a trickle of water. Getting out of bed, Mabel lit a candle and walked toward the sound. In the corner of her room, she found a small puddle of water on the floor near her dressing table, with an upright jug of water close by. Mabel took this to believe her friend was near and watching over her. That winter, Mabel's mother came to visit, accompanied by a distant relative, Rosita de la Barre. The visit seemed to be great for everyone, except Mabel.
Well, that's, yeah.
Edwin got along famously with Sarah Ganson, and Sarah seemed to adore Edwin and the life he had given her daughter, and was said to have constantly kept Edwin and Rosita entertained in heaps of laughter. So again, talking about Sarah Ganson and Mabel not being able to say anything nice about her, this is totally not true. By all accounts, Sarah Ganson was a pretty awesome, mom and mother-in-law. I don't know about mom, but at the very least, later on in life, she was a fun lady,
Yeah, I don't know. You just never. I'm wanting to say this just for anybody listening who's triggered by any of this or whatever. But you don't know sometimes
that's true.
How people are, but in a family versus outwardly. So maybe her mother was I mean, some of the things she was saying, like, I mean, you see, it's like always like a plot in a TV show where like the mother is like literally saying terrible things and then like turning around and smiling.
So
to
you're
the
saying
other
the
people.
OG gaslighting.
Maybe.
Kind of
Maybe.
being like, Mabel, look at me, I'm so great all the time. And then behind closed doors is like a total jerk.
Yeah, it could be. And it could be that both of them are like that.
That's true.
So you just
Hot
don't
take.
know. You just don't know. I mean, I did get some tarot cards recently, so maybe or I could like pull out on a Ouija board or something. We could like summon Mabel and see what we can find out. Just kidding. I don't know.
That is actually something that she would have loved by
Yeah,
now.
I was guessing that, considering that she was thinking the ghost of her friend was dumping water on the ground. Or
Very accurate.
not that she thought it, that the ghost of her friend dumped water on the ground.
I think she wholeheartedly believed it. Now again, Sarah seems to be one of the figures in Mabel's life that she cannot forgive for one reason or another, and is seemingly incapable of seeing her mother as anything but a nefarious villain, as Mabel wrote that Sarah's entertainment of Edwin was infuriating. So there's definitely some deep-seated issues there. Mabel was so jealous of both women that she started giving them the cold shoulder, and before long, Sarah Ganson and Rosita de la Barre left, not really knowing what they had done to make Mabel so mad. She straight up drove him out of her house.
This sort of stuff like does run in families too.
Hey, I know. Now, with the winter over, Mabel, Edwin, and little John set out for Florence, Italy, by way of the Alps. Upon arriving, Mabel fell in love with the antiquity of the place, as did Edwin, and the two decided to stay. Through the process of trying to secure a bank loan for the house they aimed to purchase, the Dodges met Charlie and Ava Eyre, an English couple who ran a local bank, and before long, the Dodges found themselves enveloped in the elite social sphere of Florence.
But wait, they agreed on Florence?
Did somehow.
What?
I know. It's like they're married or something.
Oh my gosh, they finally agreed.
Florence seemed to be the place for Mabel. She loved it, spent every moment she could exploring and discovering its hidden secrets. Now, despite all the happy feelings of being in Florence, there was still a darkness looming under the smile that Mabel put on. On one evening, as the Dodges dined with the Actons of the Lord Acton name, if that's ringing any bells for you.
No, but maybe for those listening.
Google it. He's famous for one reason or another.
Cool.
Mabel started to become aware of just how beautiful Mrs. Acton was, and just how much attention Edwin was paying her. Out of nowhere, Mabel dashed from the room and locked herself in the bathroom. Ava Eyre followed to see what was the matter. After tears and reassurances by Ava, Mabel chalked it up to nerves and finished out the night. The next day, she consulted with a doctor who diagnosed her that she was, quote, badly torn from little John's birth, and that she was to undergo surgery once more. Remember, Mabel had to have several surgeries due to complications with John's birth, and was recovering when her first husband, Carl Evans, was shot. Surgery was scheduled, the procedure was done, and Mabel almost died from a hemorrhage. But all's well that ends well, as Mabel made a full recovery, and the resulting side effect, so she claimed, was that she never felt jealous of Edwin again.
Okay.
How a surgery cures you of jealousy? I don't know, but that's what she says.
Okie dokie.
During all this time, Mabel and Edwin had been staying with the Eyres, but now decided that it was finally time to find a place of their own. Just like on the Italian Riviera, Mabel was picky as ever. But they did eventually find a beautiful, massive villa called the Villa Corogna at, I'm going to try my best at this, Arcetri? Arcetry? Italians, help me out here. Arcetri? Arcetri. Maybe that's what it is. I'm trying my best here. Which sat perched on a high hill in the bottom of a topographical bowl. So kind of think of like a big valley, and in the middle of the valley, there's this lovely little hill, and that's where this villa was. Now, once purchased, the couple decided on a division of labor. Edwin, being the architect, was in charge of restoring the villa to its former glory, and Mabel was to be the interior decorator. Edwin's first project was the entranceway. The two both noticed a large crack running down the side, and on a hunch, Edwin began chipping away at the plaster. Underneath, they discovered a forgotten courtyard described as, quote, the best Brunelleschi type that stood 2 stories high. This seemed to be an analogy for how Mabel saw Florence, a treasure trove of hidden mysteries that she was destined to discover. Now, this brings us to the story of Marchese Bindo Peruzzi de Medici.
Medici, I know that name.
Yes. Bindo was both a marquis, which is a high-ranking European noble, and a Medici of the famous Italian Medici family. His father was Rodolfo Peruzzi de Medici, and his mother was an American from New England who had fallen for Rodolfo at a young age. I couldn't find a cause of death anywhere, but at some point in Bindo's late teens or early 20s, his father died, and the family was left nearly broke. Despite this, Bindo went on to become an officer in the army, stationed in Rome. However, Bindo's ultimate undoing would come from his homosexuality. Sadly, a tale as old as time, Bindo was actually outed by a debt collector, arrested, as homosexuality at the time was illegal in Italy. He was sent to court. The judge absolved Bindo, but he was quickly accused again, and rather than trying to mend his now broken social status in Rome, Bindo elected to move back to Florence, a short distance away from his mother. Gossip in these days was basically television. So it was no secret that Bindo was homosexual when he arrived in Florence, and as a result, very few people would associate with him or even talk to him. Very sad. Of these few people that would associate with him were Ava and Charlie Eyre, who seemed to be the original allies, as they insisted on associating with him no matter the social cost or repercussions that should come with it. It was through the Eyres that Mabel met Bindo. Mabel was infatuated with him in a seemingly, quote, more than a friend kind of way, despite knowing he was gay. Kind of the OG, I can turn him, right? Now, Bindo initially pushed off Mabel's friendliness as he seemed to be a very sweet man who was deeply concerned with his association and what it might do to another person, but Mabel pushed and pushed. Eventually, he accepted her friendship, but obviously never went past that. He and Mabel were nearly inseparable. She called him to tea nearly every day. They went on drives together on the outskirts of town, and she even bought him his own pony and cart to ride around.
Oh,
so sweet. Mabel did seem to have genuine affection for him, but like we will see as a pattern throughout her life, she was most attracted to fame, romance, and notoriety. She referred to Bindo as, quote, the last Medici, despite knowing he had a younger brother named Rodolfo who also lived in Florence. Nevertheless, their friendship did seem to be genuine, as in one instance, Bindo came to Mabel in a broken state, explaining that his mother was in huge debt and had no way to repay it. Mabel, not wanting Edwin Dodge to discover any kind of money lent, gave Bindo a pearl necklace that was given to her by Grandma Ganson for her first marriage. Edwin never kept a note of jewelry. Bindo initially protested, but ultimately accepted. Oddly, Mabel later wrote of this event that when she gave the pearls to Bindo, she detected, quote, a fiendish look of derision, which is a really strange thing, in my opinion, to say about somebody that you seemingly have such high affections for.
Mm-hmm.
But she's basically saying that it was like an evil look of like resentment almost of him being like, why are you doing this? I don't know
But
what your thoughts are.
that's interesting. If he came to her to be like, I'm having this trouble, financial trouble, and then she's like, okay, let me help you. And then he's like, ugh.
I don't understand it. Now, with this, she also said that she saw a satanic look in his eyes. Okay? This is something we're going to see over and over again through Mabel's life. She is a complete sucker for the supernatural. Okay? Over time, the friendship between Mabel and Bindo grew more and more, and Edwin eventually began to notice and resent Bindo. Eventually, Edwin became so fed up and jealous that one evening he informed Mabel that he would be taking a trip to England and then America, and that she could join him if she liked. He was going regardless, and she could have the night to think it over. She thought it over all night, and the next morning agreed to go with Edwin. Being the ever-classy guy that he was, Edwin gave Mabel a condition. If she was to come with him, she was never to speak to or associate herself with Bindo ever again. She couldn't even say goodbye. Mabel was distraught, but agreed. Soon after they left for London, and through the Eyres, they met Lady Randolph Churchill and her son, Winston.
Interesting.
Which is pretty darn cool, so she was rubbing elbows with Winston Churchill. London suited Mabel well enough, but she thought of Bindo often as she traveled. Finally, they set sail back to America, headed for Buffalo, New York. This was now 1907, and Mabel had not been back since 1902, so quite a while, about 5 years. She was now 28 years old. The Dodges stayed in Buffalo for a few months, meeting Mabel's new stepfather, a one Admiral Reeder, attending various social events, but ultimately headed back to Florence and the Villa Coronia. When the ship neared their destination, Edwin seemed to sense that Bindo was on Mabel's mind and reminded her of their agreement. If Mabel was to see Bindo, she was to, quote, cut him dead, which I think is social for that time of being like, ignore. I don't think it means hurt or anything like that. But to cut him dead. An agreement was an agreement, and it was 7 days in Florence before Mabel was put to the test. She had just left the bank and her carriage was starting off. As it made its way down the street, she saw Bindo's carriage headed towards her. Mabel made no eye contact, gave no smile, and didn't move. Bindo's carriage moved past Mabel's as he stared at her hopelessly. The next morning, as Mabel was having breakfast, Edwin came into her room to deliver some news. I can only imagine in his mind very, very good news. The night before, Bindo had shot and killed himself.
Oh my gosh. Okay. This is interesting in general, too, because, like, she seems so headstrong, but then, like, why is she cutting her friend out? And then I'm thinking, like, she could have sent a secret note or something.
So it's a little, what happened was, when Edwin initially gave her the ultimatum, said, hey, this is what's going to happen, there was also some mention of him alluding to intercepting a letter. So, like, there was something along the lines of...
don't even try it, I know.
Exactly. Something along those exact lines. And apparently, like, she was able to get out maybe one letter or something like that in England, but that was about it. He seemed to be a bit of a Hawkeye on her and wouldn't let her do it.
And she wanted to go back to the United States because she hadn't been home for so long? Or, like, why didn't she just stay in Florence without her jerk husband?
I think, well, I mean, remember, she's 28 years old, and this is in 1906, 1907. And
yeah, but if she, like, lives in a villa, like, wouldn't it be safe enough?
But then you also have to remember she's in a family. She's got little John, she's got Edwin Dodge, they're married, and John's attached to Edwin, so she can't just be like, leave and go do this. And I don't really know what the exact reasons were, but it was more or less, I think, in her mind, when Edwin came to her and said, hey, I'm going to go to England and then America, and you can come if you want, you can think it over. There was probably an element in her mind of that means it's over if I don't go.
Yeah. And like, not just I'm taking a trip. It's like our marriage is over if you don't come.
Exactly. And her first husband had died. So that was like, okay, no harm, no foul. Like, well, obviously harm.
The first one, it's like, okay, the first one, understandable. But the second one, if her husband is driven to leave her,
exactly,
like, how does that look for, other gossipy people?
Now, check this out. So Edwin delivers the news. And when he tells Mabel, he adds, and a good thing too. Okay. It's like, it was such a sad story. But from this point on, Mabel said that for Bindo's sake, she would forevermore be the friend to the homosexual community. And remember, this was 1907.
Yeah. Yeah.
So although I do read this story and go, Mabel, you drove a man to kill himself. I think, obviously there were a lot of other factors that would have brought somebody to
she can't
do
be
that.
Fully to blame. Like, obviously everyone that was encountering him,
sure.
But like, it definitely was like a last straw and like, I have no one situation probably. And that's terrible.
And then if you remember, Mabel was the one that really pushed the friendship. She was the one that was like, no, please. We need to be friends. And then push comes to shove and she straight up snubs the guy. And then that night, it was just like, it's too much. I can't even, man. I read that and I remember I went and told Kat afterwards and she was like, what? It's the saddest story. Now, this is pure speculation, but I think that Edwin's actions became one of, if not the final straw for Mabel. She later described it as having a problem with his nature, saying that he was superficial, avoided introspection, made jokes about absolutely everything, but more in the spirit of laughing at someone rather than with someone. So, during one of Edwin's many trips abroad, Mabel developed an eye for her lead-footed chauffeur, a young blonde Italian boy whose hair turned up at the edges of his cap, named Gino, who would drive Mabel through the windy countryside roads at breakneck speeds, much to her delight. On one driving excursion, as they made their way through the countryside, Gino pointed to a young woman on the side of the road and exclaimed, "My wife!" This was of no matter to Mabel. She didn't care about wives and carried on her obsession. Again, obsessed by fame, romance, and notoriety, Mabel concocted a backstory for Gino in her mind. He was from old Italy, fathered generations ago by one of the Grand Dukes of Austria, which accounts for Gino's, sort of non-traditional complexion.
The blonde hair.
Yes. Now, Mabel couldn't be falling for some, lowly chauffeur. No. She needed to be, he needed to be a descendant of a Grand Duke, right? A true royal. That was how she liked it. Her obsession was such that she claims to have attempted suicide by grinding up shards of glass, mixing them into ground figs, and then eating it. True or not, she used this as justification for then trying to seduce the already married Gino. She figures she tried one of the two routes. One route didn't work out, so now she would try the other.
Yeah. Okay, so she's back to her tricky old self.
Look at me, I'm going to kill myself. But I don't know. She may have. Hey, look, anybody struggling out there, not meaning to put you down,
it definitely
obviously.
sounds like, it
Obviously.
definitely sounds like she was struggling generally with like mental health and depression and whatnot too.
Over her
I've
obsession with
never
Gino.
heard of that method though. That's a very creative method.
I know.
Or maybe it's not. Maybe it was like a very common Victorian.
And one of the reasons, too, that I think that one's a lie is because of something that's going to happen in a few minutes.
Okay.
You'll see what I'm saying. So, one evening, Mabel asked that Gino drive her and her housekeeper companion, Tante Rose, whose real name was Rose Clark, but Tante Rose is so much better, up to a cottage in the mountains where they would spend the night. Once Tante Rose went to bed, Mabel gave Gino the look. Gino knew what the look meant.
Yeah.
And a short while later, Gino came to Mabel's bedroom. Now, who knows what really happened, but Mabel claims she simply could not go through with it and turned Gino away. Now, this part is true, though. When Mabel got back to the Villa Coronia, she attempted suicide again, and this time by swallowing a bottle of...
laudanum.
Yeah! Which is why earlier I was so shocked that you actually knew what that was.
I've read stuff and watched a lot of period shows and whatnot.
Well, I had to Google it because I had no idea what this was. So for anybody out there that does not know what laudanum is, it was an old alcoholic quote-unquote medicine that contained morphine. Now, I'm not sure exactly how much morphine was in there, but I imagine quite a lot, as a single bottle could potentially kill you. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. But strangely, this attempt seemed to have cured Mabel of her woes and infatuation with Gino, much like her surgery did with her jealousy of Edwin. She said she was, quote, alive and glad of it.
Okay.
The gossip of her suicide did circulate around Florence, or attempted suicide, I should say, but in true Italian fashion, she was met mostly with sympathy, even having one Franciscan come to her bedroom window to serenade her with song and send up a note of parchment that read, quote, I send my song up to your heart, hoping only to lessen your pain.
Oh, how sweet.
Isn't that like lovely? I love it.
I mean, but the Italians also like were driving Bindo mad of, anyway, but yes.
It's like Jamaica. I was in Jamaica and I was like, gosh, these are the best people ever. And then you talk to them and they're like, but we hate the gays. And it's like, oh, you guys, you were so close to being the best. Sorry, Jamaicans, if you're out there listening, you got to get over that one, man. It's just, who cares? Whatever. Okay. Now, Mabel kept this note in her files for the remainder of her life, obviously.
Aww.
How could you get rid of that? Now, after this episode, like so many other times in Mabel's life, she seems to have moved on quickly. She started to take more frequent trips to Paris and stayed with Mary Sholito and Marcel Senard, who were now living together in Mary's family apartment, having inherited after Mr. Sholito had passed away a few years earlier.
Oh, Mr. Sholito.
No,
He
so
was one of those side characters that you really like.
No, you think about it. No, Mary is alone. Her mom, dad, and sister have all died in like 10 years.
Yeah, and now she's hanging out with her sister's BFF.
Exactly, in Paris. So yeah, living together now after she had inherited. Mabel found their Catholic devotion to be a bit boring and stiff, so she would often go out and mingle with the social elites and artists in Paris at the time, including the renowned American sculptor Janet Scudder, who you've probably heard the name mentioned before, and a painter and art critic named Roger Fry. As a fun little aside, Mabel really hated that Mary Shellito and Marshall were obsessed with and had a collection of, quote, masterwork paintings from the Renaissance. Now, when Roger Fry, the art critic, heard this, he asked Mabel to take him to see the collection, and upon seeing them, he identified that all of them were fakes. And Mabel was elated. Now, something else we will see, though, about Mabel is that she really doesn't have much taste for the old world, which is strange because she started out with these like Renaissance parties for her coming out and everything like that. Her debutante.
Baronial.
Yeah.
Moronic.
But beyond that, I mean, it's strange. Even though she spent a lot of time in Florence collecting a lot of old world stuff, it really starts to seem like her attention gets caught by the modern art, and that's really where her brain starts to go. And this is kind of the beginning of that. Now, despite knowing of the religious and fairly rigid lifestyles of Marshall, Mabel decided to make her next project. Though it's not made clear how or why, after some time together, Mabel seems to have lit a fire under Marshall, who had a new lease on life and was moving around the chateau like a new woman with new released energy, right? This caused Mary to become alarmed, obviously. One night, Mary came into Marshall's room to find Mabel there. It's not made clear exactly what Mary saw, but what ensued was a full-on blow-up.
I have an idea of what she saw.
I don't know. Now, I don't know this for sure, but I'm going to make a few speculations here, all right? I suspect that Mary Shellito herself was a closeted lesbian, okay? I also suspect that Marshall was at the very least bisexual, if not starting to come to terms with her own homosexuality. Mabel claims that her and Marshall's relationship was innocent, and I really have no idea, nor do I really care, but I do think that when Mary walked in on Mabel and Marshall, she assumed the worst based on whatever it was she saw. I'm also going to speculate that Mary was in love with Mabel, Marshall, or even a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, I don't know this for certain. It's just a feeling I get based on what I've read. Innocent or not, Mary did not believe Mabel or Marshall and came extremely close to tossing Mabel out on the street. During what I can only assume to be a screaming match, Marshall remained calm and quiet, repeating over and over to Mary to, quote, be quiet. Not long after this, Mabel went back to Edwin in the Villa Corona in Florence. Just kind of an interesting little aside.
Yeah. Interesting. Menage a trois.
I know. Scandal. It's back in Florence that we get into one of Mabel's first ghostly tales. And that of the story of Marguerite Michel. Marguerite was a long-time attendant of the villa, having served as the governess to the previous family that lived there, and was now serving as the instructor to little John. Marguerite was, by all accounts, a fairly simple person whose life truly was serving her employer. So Mabel became the object of her deepest affection. With this affection came jealousy, and Marguerite's temper flared often as she sought scowls at Mabel when guests were over. Soon, this jealousy became an annoyance to Mabel, so she took to teasing her and encouraged her friends to do so as well. The teasing and belittling got to be so intense that Marguerite checked into a hospital and died soon after.
What?
Yes. Seemingly she was teased to death.
A lot of people die around Mabel.
A lot of people die around Mabel. It's crazy. Now, from this point on, Mabel said she noticed a dark presence looming inside the villa. One of Mabel's house guests who stayed in Marguerite's old room complained of having a sleepless night, continuously having the feeling that a long, cold foot was trying to push her out of bed, and she refused to stay in the room another night. The sculptor, Janet Scudder, grew paler and paler each night, but insisted on staying in the room for a full week, despite constantly complaining that something was trying to pull off her blankets. Another guest of the room claimed to actually speak with the spirit and described it as a beautiful experience. On one occasion, a holy man from India stayed in the room and confirmed to Mabel that there was, in fact, a bad spirit in the room, but that didn't bother him. But because he knew it would bother other guests of the house, he sealed up the windows and doors and performed an exorcism ritual of sorts, involving countless sticks of incense and hours of chanting. He then explained they should be putting flowers all around the house and plant them all around, as dead spirits hate the smell of sweet odors like flowers.
Well, good thing there are a bunch of flowers around, right?
I think that was at the first
Oh,
villa.
that was the
That
first
was
villa.
the Italian Riviera.
Well, you know what? I bet she's wishing she had all those flowers
I
then.
know. Joke's on her. She was much safer from spirits in her old villa.
Yeah, maybe that's why it didn't have any spirits.
Now, the spirit only ever made one more appearance to Mabel during a house party while Edwin was away. Though I couldn't find exactly what happened, it's described that the spirit acted like a poltergeist and made itself known. So much so that many of the guests screamed and requested Mabel send for a priest to perform an exorcism. Mabel laughed the entire time, but ultimately sent for a priest who came over quickly and performed the ritual in front of all her guests, and she loved every moment.
Oh, yeah.
Now, not long after this, Mabel was in Paris, and most likely through her friendship with Janet Scudder, Mabel was introduced to Gertrude and Leo Stein.
Ooh, interesting.
And that's where we're going to pick it up for part 2 of Mabel Dodge Luhan.
Part 2.
What's that?
Part 2?
Part 2, which this will, I'm guessing at this point, it's at least 3 parts. I'm guessing this is probably going to be closer to 4 parts, just with the amount of writing that I've done so far on the reading that I've done.
And have you done all the reading, or you have more reading?
Oh, I still have more reading I'm going to do. I'm continuously
Hope
reading.
you
as I
like
go
Mabel
along.
Dodge, folks.
Yeah, genuinely. She's a funny figure, and we're just getting cooking on really what her life is all about. She started out with all of this kind of stuff that we're giving you as backstory. A lot of funny social stories, right? Of, hey, I met this person. By the way, we have barely scratched the surface of name dropping. There are going to be so many names dropped in like the next few episodes. It's going to be crazy. But that was what she was. She was a magnet to these types of people. And I think it all started with this really weird upbringing that she had in Buffalo and then subsequently in Paris as she got married, having this dead husband, having all these weird, rich privileges basically for the time allowed her to be something that otherwise she just wouldn't have been able to be, I don't think.
It gave her a lot of opportunity.
It did. And to be fair, though, it's strange. Next episode, we're going to get really into, or at least for a little bit, we're going to get pretty into Gertrude Stein and Leo Stein as well, and kind of what they did and what their contributions were. But a very similar situation. Leo and Gertrude Stein, and if you get into their life, more or less they came from money, to my understanding. And they used that money to pretty inarguably alter society moving forward when they really started to get going. I'm going to save it for the next episode in terms of what they contributed, but suffice it to say, I mean, some of the most amazing influential artists, especially of the early 19 kind of teens and then into the 20s and 30s, they were helping, sculpting, providing housing and food for, just sort of cultivating that art. And what we're going to kind of find is that was the first example for Mabel of what she could do. She basically saw what Gertrude Stein was doing and said, ooh, I could do that too.
I can fund artists.
Right. I can be a person.
That's interesting. I wish someone would do that for us.
Right?
Yeah. They have these crazy like social media houses these days.
They have like little incubators and stuff too.
Yeah, that's weird.
Influencer houses. That's
I mean,
can't even.
I've only seen the Law and Order episode about it.
I think I probably heard about it from you, so I don't even know if these places exist. No, they do, because there was another podcast I was listening to. Shout out to Last Podcast on the Left. Hey guys, even though you're probably never going to hear this in your entire lives.
Don't say that. It's the power of the secret.
Hey, maybe they will one day. But one of the guys on there was actually saying that he has an influencer house that is close by his house, and so he'll see them like out on the lawn doing selfie videos and stuff like that.
Skateboarding and whatever.
Skateboarding, that's too much energy.
I never
influencer.
mastered a skateboard at all. Anyway, okay, cool. Well, I'm intrigued. I already was when you just told me enough about her to know that you were going to do the research, and I was like, that sounds good, but I'm definitely intrigued, and she's definitely somebody who seems to have been fortunate, unfortunate, lovable, misunderstood, a little bit maybe manipulative, a little bit manipulated.
I think the thing that I find most interesting as I continue to learn about her is that this might sound totally cliche, but it's like the more that you see yourself in somebody else, right? Because she's made plenty of mistakes. She got a lot of things wrong. She was wrong about a lot of things. And I'm sure, for example, that situation with Bindo, I can only imagine that haunted her for the rest of her entire life. Like many situations that we, make bad decisions in haunt us for the rest of our lives. So that's the thing that I have come to really appreciate about her life, is that even though she's this sort of rich social elite type, she provided a really good example of what you could be as a human, right? You were always changing, always trying to find something new, always trying to evolve a little bit. I do believe that's who she was.
I mean, I think of myself in my mid-20s to now, like I am a different person. I am at my core the same person, but I'm a very different person. And
totally,
it's interesting as we do this podcast and we look at people over the course of their entire lives. I mean, people have seasons and people have phases and they learn, and some people don't. Some people stay the same way the whole time, but I think most of us evolve. And so
hopefully
it's interesting to just hear about someone who's as colorful as Mabel Dodge.
Completely agree. And like I said, we're just scratching the surface. I think most of the funnest stuff is to come. I feel like the first sort of quarter of her life or whatever was a lot of like days of our lives stories, whether hilarious or dramatic.
It's making me think, I don't know if you watched Downton Abbey, but like there was all this stuff that is in that, and I'm like, oh, it's just made up for the show, but like similarities. So I could see like maybe someone who made a period piece like Downton Abbey or one of those others maybe read about Mabel Dodge at one point and then took that to come up with creative stories and interesting stories to tell. But
you'll have to inform me because I've never seen an episode. I'm sorry.
Well, it is good.
Although I hear the new era is not good.
Was that the movie?
I don't know.
I don't know. There was a movie. I watched all of them. You know what? I stay pretty true to my series. If I like them, I stick with them. So I watched all anyway, but we digress. How do we wrap this up?
I think we wrap it up by wrapping it up right now and saying thanks everybody for listening initially. Hopefully you stay tuned enough that, or at least you were entertained enough to stay tuned, I should say. Thanks for joining, and I guess we'll hopefully see you next time.
Yay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to The Biographers. For more information, please visit thebiographerspodcast.com.